Union and Eastman Exports, which is one of the largest textile producers in India, supplying knitwear, apparel, accessories to major global clothing brands. The aim was to end caste-based and gender-based violence and harassment at Eastman factories. All of this started with a woman worker being raped and then murdered. And it led to this. Agreement. And one of the workers said, "We launched the hashtag Justice for Jayashree campaign at a critical point. Despite repeated complaints, no action was being taken. We felt that it was imperative to demand justice. And yet, we know that the POSH Act is actually a legislation which is not really understood as a labor legislation like the Maternity Benefits Act." And the history through which we would probably get to POSH goes back to 1997 Vishaka, which goes back to a gang rape of a Dalit woman while working. And then in 2013, you have the POSH Act, but together with the POSH Act, you also have in the Indian Penal Code sexual harassment coming in as, Section 354 is revised, which today in the BNS, the Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita, is Section 75. It retains the same. So the coming of the POSH Act's history is actually quite different than in some ways emerging very much from the women's movement and the labor movement coming together and asking for anti-sexual harassment at the workplace law. I think I'll stop with these words. Thank you.
Thank you, Rukmini. Let me just make a few points I just wanted to, on what you have said. I think you raised some very important questions. As far as this, you started with the fact that film of male migration, and it's really very, very important that it, both the films that you've mentioned, because it draws attention to the fact that the single male migration actually contributed to the male domination construct of the working class, number one, which is of course linked to the fact that social reproduction had to be still supported by the village economy, and women were there in the village economy performing much of that task. But in relation to that is also the second aspect that you raised, the question of the segregated nature of our society. The fact that there is this gender and caste-based segregation that has deep roots as far as the saying, this itself causes a certain kind of firmament in which everybody is actually working. The other thing that you raised, the question of maternity, it comes again and again from I'm not going to repeat all the things, but the fact of the matter is, especially if you look at what, even in your study, Supriya, the fact is that reproductive rights of women workers has been under such severe pressure, and capital has found its ways around it. It is always hostile to maternity benefit. It was always hostile to expending money on creches and so on and so forth. But it has found a way which is socially kind of saying by just letting the women off at that time. They're not workers during that period. And so, therefore, I do believe that the question of maternity benefit and creches cannot be just a labor issue. It has to be a central question for the women's movement. And it distinguished, in a certain sense, Indian women's movement from other movements because it used to be. It needs to be brought back. Finally, on the question of POSH and this thing, of course, I think there's no dispute. I think all of us would be in agreement. But the Dindigul agreement, I'm afraid we should slightly look at it with a critical eye, because a company-sponsored union and a brand-enforced agreement, if that is the way forward, then we are not going to have any sovereign space for our own development. That is one thing as far as the Dindigul, and we could discuss it even more, Because right now, look at our situation. Yes, we had SEVA, we had all-female trade unions, but look at the fact that the all-female workforces are going to the mixed-gender unions today. Where are they finding their voice? They're finding their voice in the mixed-gender unions also, Anganwadi workers and so on and so forth. There's a reason for that, because the way you look at the informal sector, the way you organize your informal workforce, etc., and the way the trade unions fight are totally different. So I think there are serious questions for us to consider on that. Now, let me invite, I'm sorry I took a little bit of time, but I thought we were supposed to have a bit of a conversation. Madhu, you know, from your experience on the ground, and particularly, could you reflect on how the gender and labor issues come together and your experience of work against violence, gender-based violence? If you could.
Indrani, for that. And can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much, Indrani, for opening out the panel discussion. And of course, congratulations to Cividep and to Supriya and the entire team for the report and the film, and for really opening out, the questions that have come from that for a wider discussion. This was supposed to be a conversation, but I think it's turned out to be more a more formal, somewhere in between. So let me try to make this presentation more conversational and short, because I know you all are running short of time. Yeah. Talking about the kind of interconnectedness between the labor and the women's movement, I come from the women's movement, and from the autonomous women's movement of the late 70s and 80s. So it's very interesting, because you're right, the women's movement, International Women's Day, it has its roots in in the labor and women organizing, so, and it has its roots in the labor movement of Europe, post-industrial Europe. But, in Bangalore, just to share a funny kind of memory that I have, in the 80s, we all used to come together, the women's movement, and whether it was from the formal left or, socialist feminists, we called ourselves socialist feminists. We all used to come together to organize Women's Day. And invariably, there'd be a conflict. Every year there would be an argument. The formal, women's groups from the labor movement would say it's Working Women's Day. And we would say it's Women's Day because all women work. So why are you focusing only on working women? All women work. So this every year, and it depended on who would get to the press first. So either the working women would be there or the working women would be taken off. But anyway, finally we all did get together to organize, and I think that was more the important story. But I think it's good to remember it, because I think in a way both are vindicated. I think both the stands are equally vindicated, because I think you cannot help but see that what we've been taught. I'm not an academic, okay? I am an activist, and who tries to kind of course, we try to share our insights and analyze and reflect from what we do. But I think what it makes clear to me is, what Supriya ended with, that very depressing, conclusion that was that you've come to at the end of the thing of the whole issue of social. You called it the crisis of social reproduction, and I think that is the crux for me of the matter. That wherever you go, however you go, talk of organizing, talk of problems, talk of all of that, but finally, I think. Women's labors, be it inside the ghare or the bhaire, I think both, within the home and in the world of production and in the world of reproduction, I think women's labor, women's work continues to be devalued, And if you look at the various sectors in which women are working, especially today, which is largely the informal economy, I think you find that women's labor is not only devalued, it is stigmatized, in many cases criminalized, and it is made invisible. I think that is the story of our lives. And all this in the context of very normalized gender violence. I think that is also there. It's very, very normalized. The kind of abuse that the women go through in the factories, the kind of language that is used, I think is very similar to what happens within the home. So I think there are this continuum between the productive and reproductive labor, I think is very, very strong. It is not two worlds. It is definitely, there's a continuity as far as women's labor and women's work is concerned. So I think, again, to just, go back in time, I think, when the women's movement, because the whole issue is how has issues of, like, say, domestic violence and, sexual violence today, has kind of got a more formal space, with the coming in of the POSH Act. But how did issues like domestic violence, all that, get really taken up by the formal, trade union movement? Because this was another issue that we had. As women's groups, when we used to address issues of violence against women, both within the workplace or as the wives of the workers, because worker was always seen, especially in the formal sector, the worker was invariably male. And the worker in the informal sector is female. I mean, it's a given. I think it's like when you look at the formal sector, it's male. And the figures bear it out. I think 90% of the informal workforce is women, and it's only 25. I think 85% of the formal workforce is. Pardon?
35% of the informal workforce is women.
35. Oh, I thought it was.
Its majority is men.
In the informal.
It's not just urban.
Okay, because what I had kind of the figures that when we had done a study. Okay, when we had done a study on domestic workers.
That you get here.
Okay. So this thing was that 90% is of the informal economy is 90% of the informal economy, it's women, and 85% of the formal economy is male. So so it's not surprising that that we have a divide, a clear gendered divide between the formal and the formal and informal economies as well. So just to kind of, again, just one little memory again from from the 80s is that when we used to go with issues of domestic violence, because that was our work, like personal is a political. So we used to say that it's not just a domestic thing that has to be resolved within the four walls of the house. You take it. So we would go to the the employment place of the husband to say, or we used to approach the unions to say, please, okay, if not the management and employers, we would go to the union to say, please take up this issue. This man is beating up his wife, and we were clearly told, please don't come to us with all this, because if we raise these issues, this will demoralize the working class. So you'll be really breaking the morale of the working class. So that was also something that we had to struggle through. That was a challenge that we also had to negotiate and struggle through. Yeah. So this was some of the early years. Our experiences and challenges during the early years. But of course, things started changing with time. When I think even within the formal sector, women within the unions started raising some of these issues. And also you see that, more and more as women in post-globalization, post-liberalization, with the growth of the informal, again, I will not go into the larger context, but I think you see more and more women from vulnerable communities, class, caste, religions coming out into the informal, sector economy. So you have, whether it is the Anganwadi workers, whether you have the Asha workers, whether you have the Paura Karmikas, whether you have sex workers, BD workers, all, it's all women dominated. These are the, sectors into which more and more women are coming. So domestic workers. So I think this is where, our work also kind of moved, because, when you're working with, issues of violence, you're working not only with domestic violence, you're also working with structural violence, and you go to where women are, at the intersection of that. So, our work also took us to working with women in the informal economy also. So I think in this, I would like to just share, maybe some of our experiences of working with sectors like of working with women, who are sex workers and domestic workers. We've been doing studies. We do solidarity actions. We've been called to kind of work on training, to do trainings on domestic violence, etc. So drawing from all of this, I just thought that maybe I'd share a few insights from our work, particularly with sex workers and with domestic workers. Of course, just to go back to, the kind of resistance we felt. I'm sorry, I just wanted to add that one point. Apart from trade unions, it's interesting that in the 90s, after the Vishakha judgment, a number of the garment industries, some of the more progressive, managements, they started calling organizations like ours to say, please come and do trainings, and they were allowing us access to the women. The women had to be kept very protected, right? So they were allowing us access to the women. And they said, please come and do trainings, etc., etc. But you can talk about sexual violence, you can talk about domestic violence, but please do not talk about unionizing. So it was made a condition of us to even come within the factory. You can come and do nice, safe domestic issues like sexual violence and all of that, but don't touch unionizing. So again, another challenge that one had to overcome. But of course, that once, the garment industry, there are unions, even in Bangalore, there are fragmented as they are, yet they are there. And I think they've all contributed to really strengthening the voices of the women from within the industry as well. And I think it's good that many of the, unions have also not only looked at organizing at the workplace, but they've also thought of looking at women in the communities where they're coming from. Again, the whole, link between the reproductive and the productive sectors. So I think the importance of working with the women as women and working with women as workers has been kind of recognized and addressed by the garment workers unions, I would say, through their various other organizations. So that again has been a good development. So apart from, where we've been invited into formal workspaces, and that is largely to look at issues of sexual harassment at the workplace, but we have also been working, as I said, with a lot of women in the informal sector, and particularly if you take the challenges of, say, working with something like sex work, okay? Now, women's work, as I said, is already devalued. But here, the work that women do is not just devalued, it's deeply stigmatized, and it is also criminalized. So how do you even get the consciousness of the women as workers? For the women themselves to see that what they're doing is actually work. They say it, in their everyday language. They say hottepadi kelsa ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದೀವಿ. So they see it as kelsa, they see it as hottepadu, which is livelihood. Because that is work, right? It's something that generates money for you to eat, So women see it like that. But do you kind of get the identity as a worker for the women to see it as work, and for society around to see it as work is so charged. It is so charged and so difficult. So the first issue was even dealing with the stigma and the violence and the criminalization, before you even get to the consciousness as work. So you had to kind of, layer after layer, you have to unpeel. You have to kind of open it out and air it out and bring it out into the public realm, because these things are not spoken about, right? So when we worked, we were part of a support group that helped to women's collective, sex workers collective called Sadhana, that we have been working with, right from the beginning. So it was to, as I said, the whole issue was to deal with violence. The issue was to deal with police violence, particularly. So that became the first kind of issue that one really looked at. So if you look at, what did the women workers have to deal with? They had to deal with violence from the police. They had to deal with violence from their partners, their own partners. They have partners, okay? But it's the same relationship, of exploitation, extraction, violence, brutalization. So they had to deal with the violence from their partners whom they depended on for certain notions of emotional and social security and stability. And then they had to deal with the violence from the gundas and the rowdies and the pimps. So, so the violence was at different, the violence in their workplace, came from different sources. So that was also something that one had to really, the women had to engage with, and different strategies had to be found for that. One was, how do you stop the, the police from, committing this violence? It is from filing cases back on the police. So you had, the women started filing cases against the police for violating them. So I think that was one strategy. How do you deal with the violence from your own, from the clients or from your own partners? So I think that, and that too, the partners who extracted money from them, all their labor was used, the money was taken to improve the lives and the families of their partners. So then it was to kind of get the women to say that you need to do your own savings. Sorry, yes.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Because,
I know. Yes.
I'm a very bad chair. I'm a very bad chair also.
Okay, so anyway, so this was, so to deal, so when you say violence at workplace, I just wanted to say the violence is from many sources, from multiple sources, and there is no, formal structure, no formal redressal mechanism, no formal union. Unions would, there was a debate, there was a good discussion that we had between sex worker collectives and trade unions in 2017. There was a conversation between people's movements. So there it was very clear, like the mainstream unions, how reluctant they were to even get into the field of organizing sex workers. Because there again, there's a category of good worker. You're bad enough, you have good woman and bad woman. Here you have who's a good worker and who's a bad worker. What's good work and what's bad work. So morally bad and morally good. So you see the whole notion of morality haunts women wherever they are. Whether they're, in whichever workspace that they occupy. So that was one issue, the one challenge that was there. And then do you unionize or do you collectivize? Because does a kind of structure of a union, is that more, accessible for women, for sex, in a space like sex work, or can they be organized as collectives? So that was another challenge. Then, of course, the whole thing of solidarities. I'm just rushing through, okay? And then regarding domestic workers, again, another sector that has been very difficult, where it's been very difficult for the women to get organized, because again here, it's like, the women are working in their homes, they go to work, in another home, and some of the same, emotional bondings which are exploitative get replicated not only in their homes but also in the homes of their employers. There is a kind of emotional dependence, emotional connection. So you don't see exploitation as exploitation. Like you don't see that your husband is violating you. You don't see that your employer is violating you, because they're actually very good people. So those are some of the issues that that have been encountered in the process of bringing women together. And then addressing the issue of patriarchy. Patriarchy, of course, is the unseen kind of ghost, unseen and unseen ghost that is there everywhere. But it was very interesting to see, I just wanted to share this small little case study of collectivization and unionization by the Rajasthan Mahila Kamgar Union. I don't know how many of you know, but I think they've done a fantastic job of really bringing the domestic, there are many excellent domestic worker unions all over, but I think on that scale that they have done, I think it has been very, very, I think, successful, where they've addressed not only workplace issues, but they've also addressed issues of domestic violence, by bringing the women together. And they've not only brought the women together, they brought the women together along with their employers who are also women. So in a way, they have also kind of seen the commonalities of domestic violence between so that becomes a way of also, building on that bond, that is there between the employer and the employee, while addressing issues of, justice and equity, in terms of wages. So that was, I found that to be a very interesting this thing, yeah. So yes, so I think I will end there. There were a couple of other points, but I think, yes, lots of things to be.
So sorry about
no worry, yeah.
I'm really sorry about it. I'm really sorry about this, because actually there's a lot to talk about. There are many things that I actually want to discuss, but we may discuss it towards the end.
Sorry, I don't want to.
No, it isn't. Hey, Neethi, can I request you now to come and make your remarks? And here again, it's the question of informal workers, labor politics, and the unionization, interplay of gender and class. That is what our friends would like you to speak about. So please.
Yeah. Sandhya being the last speaker, and then since both the other speakers have almost covered everything, I hope I won't take much time. But still, little bit of my experience of how I'm a trained academician, and then I work in the area of women's work and especially women's movements in the informal sector. So a little bit about nearly a decade ago when I have started my PhD research. So growing up in Kerala and then especially in a pro-labor, pro-left, whatever, left of center family. So I have already decided that I'll be working on labor movements in Kerala, and then going to a research center which is pro-labor, left of center, or left alone. So then the first question was, there is nothing more to, when I say that, I want to study about labor movement, the first thing was, there is nothing more to study about labor movements in Kerala, because Kerala has already, it's a model state, right? So Kerala had a history of labor movements, especially among informal workers. You take the case of our toddy tappers, you take the case of our cashew workers, or if you take the case of our choir workers, you can see that trade unions are already there, and you can see the presence of all labor parties, and that's the case. But that's the time in Kerala. This was late 2007. I saw in a not at all popular newspaper. I don't want to even mention the stand of that newspaper, especially a small news about a strike going on in a parallel park in Kerala. That's again a new workspace for us because it's a special economic zone, and the news was only about the strike, the 10-day long strike which is going on there. So I was just asking my supervisor, what about the strike? Shall I just go there and study about this? So the answer was that, and then of course not just the supervisor, many others. So they told, it's even a strike. How can we call it as a strike? Do they have any trade union over there? And which political party they are affiliated to? So that's where I decided I should go there and check it. So they clearly told me the day I went there. Of course, I was not allowed to get inside. So I was waiting there to meet my workers, and then later, I could meet them when they were going back home. And the first question was, which political party? They told me quite clearly, we don't have any political party here. We are not affiliated to any political party, and we don't have any male members as a part of whatever strike we are doing here. Ours is an association. So that's the first sentence that actually made me sort of, I took my call there. I decided that I'm going to study about women's movements here and see in Kerala and see how does this, how did it work and how is it going to go. So that's where I went to archives, and a fantastic book by Anna Lindberg talking about 3 generations of cashew workers in Kerala. And interestingly, I found that most of the, in 40s and 50s, when the strike was going on in the cashew factories, so the violence, domestic violence was a major part, and then both male workers and the wives of these male workers, they were also working in cashew factories. They were playing major role in these strikes, but we couldn't see any revolutionary male leader over there. And interestingly, some of these male workers were not even working in cashew factories. They were working elsewhere, but they were the leaders of that time, and they have quite a lot of sympathy towards these workers, and they were working along with these workers for getting their rights and so on. But these cashew factories, which were more than 90% of these women workers, we couldn't hear any women working leaders at that time. Second interesting case, 1960s, from late 50s to we have moved to 60s. there was a strike in one of the cashew factories. The reason being that all of a sudden, the owner of the factory decided to cut some of the welfare measures, social security schemes for these workers, again more than 90% of women workers. And the strike started and they called the police, and the arrest happened. And the police, they were taking some of these male workers from these cashew factories. Suddenly, one young woman worker, she jumped right in front of the police jeep and she removed her blouse. And she told the police, "Fire me." But that news, that was quite a scene in that moment. And after that, that narrative was going on, and then we saw that whatever newspapers or whichever form of social media at that time, reported that. But most of the reports actually quoted nothing but it was exception. These are some of the amusing thing, and this is quite unnatural, nothing more than that. Because later, when the discussion around some of the women workers who were in the cashew factories and asking them to reflect on it, they were saying that, no, she just jumped because we have seen that the male workers who used to do that, they remove their shirt and then ask the police to fire before you want to arrest us. But here, when a young woman came in front and asked that, didn't go anywhere after that. It just there some of these newspaper reports. So the point I want to raise here is that women's movement in a state like Kerala was, even for a long time, where there is a strong presence of labor movements in informal sectors especially, with the support of the state, still this was considered or this was looked upon just as exceptions, unnatural or amusing. So that's the first point. And the next one, even more interesting, I should have told this before. The very first trade union, which is a registered trade union, which came in Kerala, is called Travancore Labour Association in 1922. But the very first women registered trade union came in Kerala, when? 2016. And that is called Asanghaditha Meghala Thoilali Union, AMTU, that is Unorganized Workers Union, and which came as a part of a group of women who were working in the shops in Calicut. They stood against their right to sit and their right to use toilets. Same things what we have seen here. And that again, the challenge they faced later, when I was talking to some of them, their major challenge was the bureaucratic delays in registering their union. The Labor Department, they didn't find it convincing enough to register a union only for women. So later, they had multiple rounds of conversation. Finally, I would say unfortunately, they had to get support from, and they had to show some of the male members to finally register this trade union. So that's the story. So I think with this, I've cleared whatever I wanted to say about the gender and women's movement. Thanks.
That was really rather excessively brief, Preeti. I'm sure there were many more things you would have liked to say. But what's the time thing? We won't wind up now? So I think we've had a fairly good discussion, and we are left with a lot of questions. And a lot of questions amongst ourselves, between ourselves, and I'm sure with the audience. So that's always a good sign that there has been a discussion, and there has been, it is obviously going to be incomplete, and we will hopefully continue this particular dialogue in the days to come. But there are many things to reflect on. I don't really want to take up more of your time with any closing remarks, because I've already, I think, stretched my brief. So thank you all very much. Thank you all panelists. And shall we have our own little power later on? And I hand over to the organizers. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for keeping track of time. And yet, we are left with a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we'll have to skip it if many of us want to watch the film. And I think it's a very important film as well. We are talking about women workers, and I think it's time for us to meet them, at least on screen. This is a Cividep production, Garment Kelsa, Women and Work, by Falana Films. So let's meet Shobha, Bharti, Nirmala, Gayatri, and Rosina.